For many of us, what happened in Duluth with the flash floods was nothing more than an event that we saw on television. But for Senator Roger Reinert, a Duluth resident, it was much more. He's here now to explain the impacts and his work as a legislator. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin with, you've toured the area. We've all seen the pictures.
Sure.
What's impacted you the most of the flooding?
I think what's been most impactful was how site-specific it was throughout the community. You know, we have these images that everyone has seen. You know, much of the community was relatively undamaged, but areas that were hit were really hard. Take, for instance, me. I live in the hillside below Anger Tower. It's a popular landmark a lot of people know. My home, I had some water in the basement, but nothing too devastating. I have a creek that runs by my house that was full, but we didn't have erosion or collapsing. But I could go blocks in either direction and see just, you know, severe damage. In fact, I spent most of the day of the storm at a friend's place right below one of our parks that had a catastrophic collapse and turned the street into a raging river.
So when you were looking at it, how do you even describe what you saw and try to make it real for those of us who are hundreds of miles away?
Sure. Well, imagine walking through just a really fast-moving river. I mean, that was me trying to cross the avenue to get from where I could park to where my friend's building was. And then throw in 10+% incline, as much of the hillside in Duluth has. So now you have this force of water, 10+ inches in 24 hours. And I think the thing that I've tried to stress to people is it wasn't just that. We'd also had 8 inches in the 5 days before. So we had nearly 17 inches of rain in less than a week and a half in Duluth. So, and we're rock and we're clay. Water can't go anywhere other than down the hill towards the lake. So you had lumber, you had tree branches, you had rocks of this size being thrown down the hill by the force of the water, and just getting pelted with this. You know, we were trying to move people's cars off the hillside and try and save cars, and we were 50-50. We got a couple and we lost a couple, but it was, I mean, it was just streets turned into rivers, raging rivers. It was something that I never expected to see in Duluth. In fact, I wrote a letter to an email to legislators, and I said, you know, never in my life did I think Duluth could flood, but it can and it did. And, you know, now we're in the aftermath phase.
And before we talk about what that means for you as a legislator, I just wanted to point out that you took a really unique perspective and used social media, YouTube in particular, to essentially talk to your constituents and show some of the damage from the get-go. First of all, where'd you get the idea, or what precipitated it? And talk about the reaction. It seems to be just, it seems to have exploded, gone viral.
Well, it's been great. And where does the idea come from? Owning an iPhone. I mean, it's so easy to shoot a little video clip. And in fact, it started as an afterthought. It was the day of the storm, fighting through this river, trying to help, trying to work on things. And I thought, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And others who are not here are not going to be able to believe this. Let's take a minute clip and put it out there and let people see. And it did. It got a lot of hits. A lot of people saw it. And we thought this is a great example, or a great way that we can continue to talk about this. So when we were at the zoo the next day, we did a little bit of a clip. When we were back at Cascade Park in the center of town, when we were back there and the water was gone, did another clip just to show people what the aftermath looked like. And you know, we've used that continually now to talk about what can you do if you're interested in volunteering, what can you do if you'd like to donate. And it's a great way, especially with Facebook and with YouTube, to get something out there, and even with links in emails to get information out there that, you know, at a minute, it's pretty digestible for most people in the workday or at home.
Now, when the impacts of the flooding were first being felt, how did you react, not just as a person and a resident, but as a legislator? How long did it take that part of your brain to kick in and think, what am I going to have to do here?
Sure, probably 2 days. I mean, day one was helping friends and helping strangers, just helping people that were being directly impacted. I remember coming home at the end of that first day, and like I said, I have a house that has a creek right next to it, and thinking, oh my gosh, what if the creek overflows at my house? I mean, I hadn't given any of my own personal things much thought yet. Then the next day was just trying to put pieces back together. And it was sort of the end of that next day when it was like, and you could digest the scope of the impact, that you started to go, wow, I mean, this is going to be federal disaster, state declaration. This is probably going to be a special session with so much public infrastructure damaged. And then, of course, it was individual constituents that were being impacted. Where do they go? How do they get help? And I really want to commend the governor, and I want to commend the commissioners, especially Commissioner Rothman from Commerce, who the day after had, here's a whole packet of information on insurance. How do you work with your insurance provider? What if you don't have insurance? And as a legislator, we know a little about a lot of things. We're not experts in a lot of areas. All that is helpful to me and to the staff here to try and help people when they're calling in and don't know where to start.
So from a legislative perspective, what's next for you? FEMA has already toured. The governor has been up there. So where do you take it from here?
Our next big process is to finish the assessment, and we're just about there, so that we can say to the federal government, here is the cost of the impact. We have about $100 million just within the city of Duluth. You go just south of us to Thompson, to Jay Cook State Park. Highway 210 alone probably has $25 million in damage. We need to get all of that put together, including Barnum and Moose Lake and all of those communities, so we can say to the federal government as a region, here's what the impact was. Then hopefully we have the declaration from the president of a disaster area, and then we can start moving forward in the federal funds, matching it with the state funds. And of course, that's when we'd have hopefully a special session to put together that package.
And given the scope of the destruction, I think it's a fair assessment that you're going to want these things to happen sooner rather than later. So give me a timeline. What do you think is realistic here?
Well, hopefully we'll have the assessment finished within the next week, maybe as early as the start of next week. We'll get that information out to the federal government. I'm not sure what their timeline is. We're going to ask, of course, for a turnaround as quickly as possible. If we look back a couple years ago to what happened in Owatonna, we had about a 2-month time span from the date of the incident until we had that one-day special session to accept those federal dollars, pair them with the state dollars, and get those out. So I think that for most of us, that's probably the timeline we envision ourselves being on.
And what about a timeline to actually get working on cleanup, repairing roads? I would imagine it's already begun, right?
Yep, absolutely underway. Some of the most famous photos from the day of the storm, the one that everybody is familiar with was the big sinkhole that the car was in the bottom of on Skyline. That's already been filled. It's not perfect, but it's passable. The main roads in West Duluth, where we had 15 homes that had been completely cut off because of landslides, one of those has been filled, so those folks have access now. Within our community, the worst hit area is still Fond du Lac, our neighborhood right down by the St. Louis River, right down by Jay Cook State Park. They still are struggling. They still don't have access. They still don't have sort of a daily routine, but for much of the city, that's returned. So, the challenge becomes to take these temporary fixes and make them permanent. And I was meeting with our Director of Public Works yesterday. He said, I have 220 major projects, major restoration. That's not going to all happen within one construction season. And residents know that. And I commend people. They've been very great about being wonderful neighbors, but they've also been great about just understanding. We can't get this all done tomorrow. It's going to take time. It may take this season, next season, maybe even 2 years to sort of get everything back to normal, or hopefully even better than it was.
You're touching upon, or you spoke about some places that a lot of Minnesotans hold dear, Jay Cook State Park, et cetera. And ironically, we were talking off camera, just 2 days before these rains was Grandma's Marathon, one of the biggest events in that area. But now tourism is down approximately 30%, so can it be salvaged?
Well, and that's part of what we're trying to do right now is really get a message out there that yes, while we were hit, and areas that were hit hard, much of the community, it was left undamaged. In fact, the areas other than Jay Cook State Park that tourists are used to seeing were not damaged at all by the storm. So the worst thing we could have happen would be this second punch of a long decline in tourism and a sustained decline in tourism. And you're right, we've seen in our hotels and our restaurants about a 30% decline since the storm, with cancellations and people not coming. So when folks outside Duluth say, what can I do to help? Number one, easily, don't cancel your plans to visit. And in fact, if you hadn't thought about it, now's a great time to come up. If you're one of those folks who said, I love Duluth in the summer, but can never get a room or a room I can afford, you can now. And the dollars generated from food and beverage taxes, from general sales taxes, those are dollars we're going to use to help rebuild. So if you love our community and you want to support us, just come visit. That's a great start.
Okay, Senator Roger Reinert, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.